It's time now for Countywide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Join Paul David and Kyle Benedict as they talk with our community's leaders, newsmakers, and people in the know. You'll hear about the hot topics that affect all our lives in Yavapai County. And now here's today's Countywide.
Welcome to Countywide. I'm Kyle Benedict. Today we're talking about childhood development and the effect that electronics has on that development. And I think myself, I see this a lot, and people out there as well, that it seems that kids, adults especially, can't go a day without looking at their phone. They always have it with them, and that gets passed on to our children, and we start to see the usage in children up as well. And that brings up the question, how are electronic devices, phones, tablets, how is that going to affect their development later on in life? So here to kind of shed some light and kind of give us some insight on the just childhood development in general are two associate professors with NAU Department of Communications, Sciences, and Disorders. We have Anna Sosa and Mary Harmon. Thank you both so much for being here with me today. Okay. So we were talking before the show, as far as this question of the effects that electronics have on the development of children, there seems to be more questions than answers because this is relatively new. We talked about before the show that the iPad came out, say, around 2010. And since then, there's been so much development in these portable communication devices that, you know, we all use on a daily basis and they get passed on to our children. So to start things off, I guess, Anna, if you could just tell me a little bit about some of the work you do over there at NAU.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I also do research in language development. And my main areas of both clinical and research focus are very early language development, even pre-linguistic, so development of babble and before language communication skills. One area that I've looked at recently is the influence of different types of play, different types of toys that parents can use with their kids, and how that might impact the communication between the babies and the toddlers and the parents, and how that ultimately might impact their language development. I also do some work with slightly older kids in the development of the speech sound system and children who have delays and disorders in that area.
Okay. And how about you, Mary?
I'm also a certified speech-language pathologist, and a lot of my research has focused on preschool-age children, and I have investigated the benefits of using computer-assisted instruction in the classroom, so in other words, educational software, and the benefits of using that type of information in the classroom and how children's emergent literacy can benefit. I've also looked at the use of iPads in the classroom, in Head Start classrooms, to see children who are just using these devices that are programmed with different applications. Do we see a bump in their emergent literacy skills or some of those early literacy skills that we see in preschool-age children? And again, the bulk of my work has been with preschoolers.
So as I mentioned, we have a lot of questions with this topic of children, their development in electronics. What are some of the main questions that you guys have? I mean, obviously we wanted to get that out there, that there's more questions, and we're going to kind of go through the different stages of development to help kind of shed some light on this topic. But what are some of the questions that you guys have?
I think up until recently, as you mentioned, the iPad and the new electronics that are so portable, the research that we've had on any kind of impact on communication development with kids and the use of media has been based around television, which is a very different thing. It's stationary, it's in the living room, it's probably more easily controlled, and we really don't have any information about how this constant use in all areas, when you're out at the store or on car trips or at the dinner table, using electronics might influence both language development and I think conversational, social communication development, or even social interactions, which we know is such a huge part of communication. Learning communication is learning that social interaction, which begins during that first year of life. And if the babies are staring at the devices as opposed to focusing on mom's face and going back and forth, I'm very curious to know what impact that might have on social development as well as communication development. We have
some stats here from the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association. They polled some parents this year and said 57% of babies, 59% of one-year-olds, and 68% of two-year-olds use, say, tablet devices at home. I mean, babies, that's Under one. 57%. That's amazing.
Right.
So let's just kind of dive into it. within the first year, what are some of the things what are you developing within the first year?
So as I mentioned, that social interaction, I mean, from as early as the first month, babies are learning to focus on their parents and kind of go back and forth. So they're not talking, they're not using words, but they're cooing and making sounds. And parents are responding to that, so they're very responsive. And so they're really learning this back and forth, the basics of conversation, if you will, during that first year. Later, the second half of the first year, so 6 months and on, babies are starting to produce sounds that are more speech-like, so babble-like sounds, ba, 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 ba. And we always encourage parents to respond to that, to react to that as if it were them saying something meaningful and respond to that, and that builds children's understanding and ability to ultimately form those sounds that they're making into words once they hit about 1 year old. They're using gestures. That's a big key point in development, where they can communicate meaningfully before they can use words. So they're pointing to things to say, oh, look at how cool that is, when they're just saying bah, and pointing, asking to be picked up by raising their hands up to their parents. So before they're using words, they're communicating very intentionally in that second half of the first year. Once they hit 1 year, that's when we start to see true words come in.
Now, in terms of developing their vocabulary, I guess, is that all through basically just that interaction with the parents? I mean, when do we see, Mary, the importance of interaction with other children?
That should really come pretty early. We really want to see kids interacting with other children, certainly before the first year of life. But something that I wanted to add on to in terms of when Anna was talking about the cooing and how the parent responds to that cooing, that's also really important skill for children to understand, and that is that there's this turn involved. So the child makes a sound and then the parent responds, and that's called parental responsivity, and that really helps children learn language and expand upon their language. And so, for example, at around the age of 1, or around the age of 1, we start to expect children to start to produce more words, and then as they get older, they'll start to add on more and more words to their sentences. And part of that is the result of how the parent has responded to the child early on. And in terms of better response to your question, really we want to see children interacting with each other as early as possible, just to give them an opportunity to share their communication together, their sounds together, to start to develop that turn-taking together. So it's not just with the parents, but also with other children, that they can learn those turn-taking skills.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to take our first break, but right now we're just kind of going over some of the different stages of development in children to kind of just, again, more questions than answers, but see what the effects on electronics, how that will affect their development when they get older. So sitting down with two associate professors from NAU, Anna Sosa and Mary Harmon. When we come back, we're going to talk about around 2 years old, 68% of children 2 years old use tablets at home. So we're going to cover that when we come back here in just a couple minutes.
Right, mi cariño. So like I said, everything I learned about cooking, I learned from Grandma's empanadas. Shall we go again?
Yep.
Mix beef with the onions with the peppers with the paprika with the garlic with the oregano with the cumin. Got it?
Got it.
Throw on the olives, stir, season, stir again, pour out the flour, roll out the dough, make a circle, drop in a fistful of filling, fold over, press down, and ta-da!
Most parenting is hard to do in just 2 minutes. But 2 minutes twice a day making sure they brush is easier, and it could help save them from a lifetime of tooth pain.
They said a bottle was just a bottle. That no one would ever notice me. But I knew I could be more. That one day, I would make people smile.
Why is my son having trouble in school?
Finding lowest airfare to Istanbul.
No, I'm tired of fighting with my son over his homework.
Home, walk, restaurant. Need a review?
No. He's smart, but his mind wanders.
7 wonders of the world.
Why don't you understand me?
I do. I was trying to show how Connor feels every day. Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
Welcome back to Countywide. I'm Kyle Benedict, joined with 2 associate professors, Anna Sosa and Mary Harmon from NAU's Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders, talking about the effect that electronics have on children and their development. Again, more questions than answers. We want to stress that, but we're just trying to get a better understanding of what's happening in terms of child development throughout the years. We covered up to within the first year, but by 2, what's their development looking like at that point?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, once kids hit about 12 months, that 1-year birthday, we start to expect real words, true words, simple words, and a slow learning curve at first, a few new words here and there. About halfway through that year is when we really see a real burst in vocabulary development, and kids are learning lots of new words. Once they hit about 50 words, they're going to start putting phrases together, so using short and simplified sentences. So, where kitty, go bye-bye, what's that, things like that. And all the while, their understanding of language is really growing, so they can understand a lot more than they can say at this point. As far as their speech sound development, so can we understand what they're saying? Obviously, they're making lots of errors with how they produce the sounds, but it's really growing, and they're producing they should be producing lots of different consonant sounds, lots of different word types, some shorter words, some longer words. And parents, by about 2 years, the average vocabulary that children can say by about 2 years is somewhere between 150, 200, 250 words. So it's pretty big for the average vocabulary at that point.
So now do you want, should parents within the first, 2 years when their kids are starting to develop these words, interaction seems to be the key. Now, should parents be building on that vocabulary if they say tree? Should parents be, big tree, small tree, kind of building on that?
Absolutely. So parents are repeating back what their children say as kids get a little bit more mature in their communication, then expanding on it. So just like you said, tree, oh yeah, that's a big tree. That's a green tree. I see the tree. So expanding on what they're saying. And what we know about how kids do learn vocabulary during this phase is the more parents talk to them, the more words they learn. So really hearing lots of language in their environment. And as Mary mentioned earlier, that responsivity. So focusing on what the child is interested in. So watching your child, and if they're focused on that tree, we'll talk about the tree, don't try and draw their attention to something else. And it's that responsivity that we know is really beneficial for language development, which is one of the reasons it's discouraged specifically by the American Academy of Pediatrics under age 2. They discourage use of electronic media and television usage because it's not responsive in that way.
And that's what you get from that interaction, that personal interaction with your parents or other children like we were mentioning.
And Kyle, also, sorry to interrupt you, but a really important consideration for all parents is it's not just if you're in the home, if you're in the car, it's if you're walking your child, around your neighborhood, if you are at the public library, talking about things that are in their environment, because something that we know is a child's experiences or a child's world knowledge can actually build upon their word knowledge. And so giving your child an opportunity not to just see things and to experience things, but again, as Anna mentioned, to talk about them in simplified language in those early years. And
it seems like when children, especially under 2 years old, these statistics are mind-blowing here, but it seems like if you're just putting a tablet or a phone in a kid's face and they're just staring at it laying on the couch, it seems like they're not getting that interaction, which seems to be so important. But Mary, you've done some work, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, with tablets in schools and some of these educational programs, I guess. What have you found with some of those studies and those tests?
Well, years ago I did a study related to the use of educational software programs on computers in Head Start classrooms. And what I really found is if there is not some intentional instruction going on, in other words, that the teacher is not there supporting the child's learning, we didn't see a huge bump in the children's emergent literacy skills. So the big part of that statement is the whole being supportive and the interaction between the teacher and the child. And then a few years ago, I also did a study using iPads in classrooms, and these were using different applications to support children's emergent literacy skills, including letter knowledge and letter sounds. And it was really the same thing. What children tend to do is they'll see this application or they'll see this educational software, and they'll, maybe whiz through it, they'll scan through it. They'll find the most fun part of these programs and focus on that, to the exclusion of those aspects of the program that are more educational. In other words, practicing those sounds, matching the different letters. It was more about the bells and the whistles than the educational.
I mean, I remember when I first got my first smartphone, and the first time I picked up a tablet, it was, you're swiping through things and you're like, wow, look how smooth that is. And the colors are so vibrant. And that was me when I was a teenager. I can't imagine what it would be like for someone who's 2-3 years old, even younger. It seems like you're more intrigued with the appearance and the motion and what's going on, instead of actually utilizing the program or the application to its fullest.
Right. I think what we're finding is the kids are pretty darn good with that technology. They're almost proficient with that technology, but it's not the learning. They're not getting the importance of those different educational applications.
So is there some benefit, would you say there is some benefit to using at least some type of electronics? Again, more questions than answers.
Right, more questions than answers. There can be benefits, but again, not in isolation. It cannot be passive. There really has to be some active learning going on. There has to be some engagement going on between the child and the caregiver, whether it's a parent or a teacher.
And I would say some people might argue that these new apps are very interactive, and I've heard that these are different from setting a child down in front of a television show and having them watch television, that when they push a button or move something, something happens, like there's a result, and they may have this sort of, oh, I accomplished, I did something feeling. So I think some people might argue that these newer interactive apps are different, and they very well might be. It's just at this point we don't have any research. All of the recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics and such are based on research that's been done with static television viewing. And we know that kids over 2.5 or 3 can learn some stuff from high quality programs like Sesame Street. They can learn some vocabulary, they can learn some letter names and such. Children under 2, they've never seen any benefits for kids under 2 with even these high quality television programs. But again, what we see now with these apps on iPads and iPhones on tablets are very different, and it remains to be seen what the impact is.
Great. Well, we're going to take our second break, but when we come back, we'll kind of build on that and talk about some of the ways that we might be able to learn some more with the effects of electronics in childhood development. Sitting down with Associate Professor at NAU, Anna Sosa, and Mary Harmon. We'll be right back in a couple minutes. This is Countywide.
So they say it's a man's world? Well, I don't see anybody's name on it. While they were out doing their thing, we slowly changed all that. We changed all that. Today, women can do anything men can do. And there's one thing we're even better at.
Pretty much a good day for me would be people leaving their hands off of me. I'm always called names. Everywhere that I go, there's always someone calling me names, calling me gay. I've been choked, thrown up against a wall, punched. Nobody's ever tried to help me.
Did you know kids who play outdoors have healthier lungs?
Totally.
Did you know that boys that play with dolls make better husbands?
My son has lots of dolls.
But did you know terry cloth diapers breathe better?
I did.
It's totally true.
Oh, yeah.
Did you guys know statistically friendly kids have more friends?
Yeah.
That's obvious.
Did you know most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right seat. Visit safercar.gov/the-right-seat to make sure your child is protected.
Welcome back to Countywide. I'm Kyle Benedict with Anna Sosa and Mary Harmon. They're with associate professors with NAU Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders. So again, one of the stats we read at the beginning here, we have a few minutes left in the program, but 57% of babies, 59% of 1-year-olds, and 68% of 2-year-olds use, say, tablet devices at home. That's amazing. 55% of children under 8 use technology devices on car trips, 12% in dinner table. So, I mean, this just shows that kids are using electronics, and thanks to you guys, we have a little better understanding on kind of the different stages of development. Now, in the future, again, a lot of questions. How would you go? What are some of the things you would be looking at here in the future on the actual effect that this has on children's development? What are some of the ways you would go about?
As you were reading through those stats, I'm looking at the next points there, and I think one of the things that was striking to me from this ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association parent poll, was that the majority of parents actually seem to think that these use of technology can help young children develop communication skills. So the number was 66% agreed with that statement that this might help. I think that's something we can test and say, does it? You know, so if these apps are being marketed to parents and to children, saying this will teach your child letter names or letter sounds, or will teach them vocabulary associated with this, that's something we can actually test and say at what age and with what type of usage, as Mary was saying, is it, if they're using it all by themselves, are they actually learning these things that the apps are advertising? If they're using it with a parent and it's actually interactive. So those are some things that we could come up with real answers to and let parents know and say, you know what, it either is or isn't doing what it says it's supposed to do.
I think whether or not we know it is or it isn't, at this point, I think you have to, if you're going to you let your kids use your phone or your tablet to watch Netflix or watch a movie or play games or whatever, I think it's important. Now again, this is just my opinion based on what we've talked about here, but to also balance that out with interaction with other children, to have those play dates, to get them outside and to sit down and read to them. I assume reading is a huge deal.
Reading is huge, and I think something that a lot of parents don't always understand or appreciate, you can start reading to your child very early. In the first few months of life, you can be reading, very simple board books to your child. You can make it interactive as a child gets older. Expect the child to point to things. Ask the child questions about what was read, or ask the child questions about what's in the book. And I think with electronic books, which you can program, you can get it on a tablet, on a Kindle, on just about anything. Children can certainly learn from those books. However, the important part, again, is the interaction between the child and the caregiver, asking them those questions to make sure they're really understanding what it is that they're reading. That's really crucial to learning.
Okay, great. I think that interaction is the key point there. So Anna Sosa and Mary Harmon, thank you both for being here so much and making the trip down from NAU. Yeah, and good luck going forward. Hopefully we can kind of answer some of these questions, hopefully.
Let's hope so.
But again, thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you.
I'm Kyle Benedict. That's Countywide, talking about childhood development and the effect that electronics have on that. That's going to do it for us today. We'll see you next time.